The next two speeches you will do in this class are the demonstration speech and the informative speech. I'm going to talk about both of these speeches right now together because characteristic-wise they are very similar speeches. The demonstration speech is really a type of informative speech. So there will be some slight modifications for each of these speeches, but let's talk about them together. And to give you an idea of how they are different really is that the demonstration speech tells you how to do something, whereas an informative speech will tell you about something. So, for example, you could do a demonstration speech on how to pitch the perfect baseball, whereas you could do an informative speech about baseball. And I will say this, I'm totally okay if your demonstration speech and your informative speech are similar topic-wise. So if you wanted to do the baseball example that I just gave you, you certainly could. I don't want you to, reinvent the wheel or to make this any more difficult for you than it needs to be. So let's start by talking about some different topic ideas. That should be the first place you would go. The first way to kind of think about a topic is that it needs to be researchable. I know I'm probably making up a word there, but it should be something where you have to go out and seek a little bit of information to support what it is you're saying. I do expect too that these topics be what I would consider academically rigorous. Understand that you are college students and you're speaking to college students, so you shouldn't be, talking about something that everyone knows how to do. I don't want to hear speeches on how to tie your shoe or how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because that's not really as academically strong as you want to be. But it should be something you already know about or something, and that is interesting to your audience, that your audience may not know how to do. So let's start with demonstration speeches, and I've already kind of touched on this. A demonstration speech are speeches that describe how to do something, whereas an informative speech is going to be something that tells you about something. So again, go back to my baseball thing. And finally, as far as deciding which topic you're going to go to, understand that it's probably something that you already know how to do. So if you know how to change a tire on a car, go for it. If you know how to tie a tie, go for it. Don't go out and relearn something. I know there's all those tutorials on YouTube. I don't want you to watch a tutorial on something, teach yourself how to do it, and then do it for a speech. But understand too that it can be kind of an everyday sort of thing. So don't try to make this any more difficult than it has to be. So let's go through some of the logistics of this particular speech, some of the just criteria. And this is just really just for this class. It's not for all speeches. So the first one is time limit, 5 to 7 minutes. Please adhere to this time limit. I've found it's particularly difficult for students to manage this time limit, especially with a demonstration speech. They tend to go overtime on the speech a lot. So make sure you're describing something that you can actually describe in 5 to 7 minutes. As far as sources go, I'm not going to require sources for the demonstration speech, but I will require a minimum of 3 sources for the informative speech. And I want them to be quality sources. It doesn't just have to be things that you find, online and, by Googling something. It could be interviews or whatever, but I just need at least a minimum of 3 sources. And then the last criteria is that kind of characteristic I would say of this is that visual material is often used in this speech, especially for the demonstration speech, because for the most part you're showing us how to do something. There is no requirement that you use visual aids for this speech or really for any speech, but it's one that sometimes helps. I will talk more about visual aids in another lecture that is on this module, so be looking for that one. So let us go over some of the principles or the characteristics of this particular speech. First is that you want to limit the amount of information. You want to try to explain less information in more detail than trying to tell your audience everything you know about the topic. Sometimes that's kind of hard because you know so much about the topic. But I will say you're better off explaining less information in more detail and explaining it in such a way that your audience can understand. The next is that you want to stress the relevance and usefulness of the topic. Your audience is going to want to know what's in it for them, what can they do with it. Make sure that is clearly stated at the beginning of the speech, and then you want to remind your audience of it throughout your speech. The next is that you want to present the information at the appropriate level for your audience. So if you're speaking to a group of 10-year-olds, you're going to say things differently and use different examples and stuff versus if you were speaking to an audience of college students or retired people or whatever. I've often given presentations to a variety of audiences about the importance of eating healthy. And one of the things that I sometimes mention is I talk about the need to increase our fiber intake. Now, when I say that, when I talk about this subject to, when I'm speaking to a group of 10-year-olds, which I've done, I usually say something in there about beans. You need to eat more beans. And of course, you tell 10-year-olds, especially 10-year-old boys, about beans, and they're instantly talking about farting. Now, and it's totally okay. That gets them engaged. But, I probably wouldn't talk about that with college students or a group of retirees. They would find that inappropriate. But younger audiences, it connects with them. Next is you want to relate new information to old information. Connect to what your audience already knows about a particular subject. So that just helps them to remember and to understand. Next characteristic is that clarity. It's clarity and coherence. This one is one where you make your structure clear from the beginning. You follow steps that your audience can understand you. Obviously, it's especially important with a demonstration speech because if people don't understand the steps or the order in which those steps go, they're going to have a mess on their hands. Next principle or characteristic is that it is presented through several senses. So not only is your audience going to hear your speech and see you delivering it, but they're also perhaps going to touch or taste or smell. Those kind of things help the audience to remember it longer term. I had a speech that someone did over 20 years ago on aromatherapy. I still to this day remember what he told us about aromatherapy and about how different scents impact us. So those kind of things help. If you're doing a speech about how to make a particular kind of food, having a sample of that food helps the audience to remember it. And it's also kind of mean if you do a food speech and don't give your audience samples of it. And then the last characteristic is that it does not persuade. You're telling your audience about something. You might want to encourage them to do something, but it's not, you must do this. We must bring about change. I can tell people how important it is to eat healthy, but I also don't want to cross the line and say you must do this. That's for a whole different speech. And let's finally talk about effective word choice. This is one in which your audience needs to make sure you really understand. Of course, effective word choice is important with all of them. But if you're telling something where you want your audience really to understand, you want to make sure it's in this speech as well. So first thing is accuracy. You want to make sure you're using the correct words. You want to avoid using vague terms that your audience might not understand. You want to avoid using slang terms that your audience might not get. You want to make sure the words you're using are very clear. The next is simplicity. You want to use more familiar words that your audience understands. So, and I also think from a delivery standpoint, using these more familiar words, it makes it easier for you to do. You don't have some big words that you're going to trip over. So, and then the final strategy for effective word choice is coherence. I mentioned this before on the previous slide. You want to make sure it's clear and your audience can follow you. For what this means for you is employing a few different strategies throughout your speech. The first one are signposts. Signposts, think about a sign you would see driving down the road. They give you a little bit of directional information. So signposts might be words like first, next, third, whatever. That'll show you how things are ordered. Internal previews would be a sentence that you would have at the beginning of each point that kind of give an overview of the information that's included in that point. So if I'm going to do a speech on baking a cake and my first point is going to be about the ingredients and supplies, I might start that point with the first step in making a cake is gathering the supplies and the ingredients that we need. So that's what I'm going to tell you in this point. Internal summaries would just summarize what you've said in that particular point. So now that we have our supplies and our ingredients, we can start baking the cake. Final summaries would be what you'd have in the conclusion of the speech, in which you summarize all of your main points. The transitions are sentences you have between points that signal movement from one point to another. something like, so now that I've talked about the supplies and ingredients you need, next we'll talk about how to properly mix these ingredients. And finally for you, I have, here are some different examples of informative and demonstration speeches. I actually think looking at this that there's more demonstration speeches examples here. I will post under the informative module some examples of strictly informative speeches here. The pickup speech that I have listed here is there's also a link in this module under CourseDent. I've included another link there as well for a speech. It's a good idea to look at a variety of demonstration speeches and informative speeches just so you understand how they work. These examples are from students just like you. There are some better examples. There are some examples that need perhaps a little bit of tweaking, but be sure to watch and read these and see and watch these speeches just to see those positive and negative strategies that they're using.